Hey everyone, welcome back to the Deep Research Podcast.
Great to be back.
Today we're embarking on, a really deep dive into an incredibly complex and rapidly evolving situation.
hmm
We're talking about that delicate, often contradictory dance between Iran, Israel, and the United States, especially after that much-discussed U.S. strike.
Right.
We've got a stack of sources here that honestly reveal a truce that's far more fragile and just full of strategic twists than you might realize.
Absolutely. It's not straightforward at all. Think of it like a high-stakes poker game.
Yeah, exactly, where every player is holding cards that might, genuinely surprise you.
And our mission today, really, is to try and cut through some of that noise, examine the conflicting narratives out there, and really understand what's really going on beneath the surface. Why are these key players making the moves they are?
And what are the implications for all of us?
Exactly. And you'll find that what seems pretty simple on the news is actually built on, well, layers of intricate strategic maneuvering, some deep-seated domestic pressures we need to unpack,
Ah, interesting.
and some truly surprising economic calculations that really affect everything. It's all connected.
Okay, let's get into it. Segment 1, the shifting sands of the Iran conflict.
Right.
For many people, I think it felt like after the U.S. strike on Iran, especially with that immediate, very decisive rhetoric we heard,
Very strong rhetoric.
yeah, that maybe things might settle down. Or, at least we'd have a clearer, more definitive picture of the damage that was done.
That was the hope, maybe.
But our sources are suggesting a much more, ambiguous reality. The narrative around this supposed end to the conflict is anything but clear, isn't it?
Not at all.
It's almost like everyone is operating on a completely different version of what just happened.
That's a really crucial observation. What's truly fascinating here, and a bit alarming, is the immediate, almost jarring divergence in reporting that just erupted right after the strike.
Okay, like what?
Well, consider this. Donald Trump, for instance, was very definitive, very clear. He claimed the Iranian nuclear program was essentially destroyed, presented it as a decisive victory, done deal.
Right, I remember that. Case closed.
But then you look at mainstream American media, and almost in a unified voice, they pushed back vigorously.
Oh, really? How so?
They were quite insistent, saying the strike was largely ineffective, didn't really impact any significant nuclear facilities. So you have these two polar opposite narratives.
Wow.
And this isn't just about, conflicting reports or the usual political disagreement. It creates this critical strategic uncertainty. It's a fundamental lack of consensus on what actually occurred.
Okay.
As one Politico article we reviewed suggests, and I quote, "The assessment of the American strike is still premature."
Premature, so we just don't know for sure.
Exactly. This absence of definitive confirmation, this sort of cloud of ambiguity, creates a crucial strategic void. And you can be absolutely certain Iran is already exploiting that.
How so?
They thrive in this kind of information vacuum,
Yeah.
where truth is contested and perceptions can be shaped so easily.
So it really is like two different movies playing at the same time. And as the audience, we're not sure which one is the reality.
That's a perfect analogy, yeah.
That kind of profound ambiguity where even the American public isn't quite sure what the true impact was. That must give Iran an enormous amount of room to maneuver.
Huge amounts.
They can shape their own narrative, can't they? Spin the outcome to their advantage regardless of, the objective facts on the ground.
Precisely. And speaking of maneuvering, Iran just dropped a bombshell, frankly, something that truly surprised many international observers, particularly given the timing right after the U.S. strike.
Okay, what happened?
Amidst all this uncertainty surrounding the U.S. strike's true effectiveness, the Iranian Parliament suddenly voted, with a significant majority, to formally withdraw from cooperation with the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA.
Whoa, okay. Withdraw from cooperation. That sounds serious.
It is. This is an unprecedented move. It's not something they've done lightly or even done before in this specific manner, and it immediately ratchets up the tension on the international stage.
Okay, let's unpack this for a moment. The IAEA, as many listening probably know, is essentially the global watchdog for nuclear activity, right?
Correct. They're the UN's nuclear watchdog.
They're the ones on the ground, making sure countries are sticking to their non-proliferation commitments, verifying things.
Inspections, monitoring.
So what exactly does withdrawing from cooperation mean in this context? Especially when we consider, and this is key, that the IAEA Director General had just welcomed the ceasefire.
Right, only days before.
And importantly, emphasized the urgent need for their work to verify safeguards in Iran after the recent attacks reportedly damaged several nuclear sites. It feels like Iran is almost doing the exact opposite of what the international community was hoping for.
It does seem that way.
Like throwing a wrench into any hopes of de-escalation or transparency.
It means several critical and, frankly, alarming things. You've highlighted the core contradiction perfectly. This isn't merely a symbolic gesture, though it certainly carries immense symbolic weight.
So it's practical.
Very practical. When Iran talks about withdrawing from cooperation, it implies a very concrete intent to deny access to inspectors.
Okay. No more inspectors.
Think about the practical implications for a moment. It means no more eyes on their facilities, no more verification of their nuclear material, no more monitoring equipment.
Wow.
The IAEA uses, sophisticated cameras, seals, and crucial on-site inspections to verify that nuclear material isn't being diverted from peaceful uses to weapons programs.
Right, the core of their job.
Denying access effectively means going underground with their nuclear program, operating in secret.
Okay, that's worrying.
This decision to abruptly cut off oversight from the very body tasked with monitoring nuclear activities strongly suggests Iran might be moving to secretly enrich uranium. And, crucially, it hints very strongly at an intent to acquire nuclear weapons capability.
So this isn't just about peaceful energy anymore. This move signals something else.
It's a very clear, very stark signal to the international community about their future direction. Their willingness to push boundaries far beyond what was previously expected.
And the timing. You mentioned the timing.
Yes, the timing is especially dangerous. This happened after the ceasefire. It wasn't like, say, avert to close the Strait of Hormuz, which might happen during an active war. This was post-conflict, seemingly.
So it wasn't a reaction in the heat of the moment.
Doesn't look like it. It demonstrates Iran's intent to escalate on the diplomatic and nuclear fronts rather than de-escalate. It's a strategic declaration of intent, made even more potent by that ambiguity surrounding the recent U.S. strike.
Wow. Okay, so that sets the stage for the next phase. Let's move into segment 2. Iran's power play, looking at these nuclear ambitions and their negotiation leverage.
Right. Because this IAEA move has huge implications. You've really hit the nail on the head regarding the gravity of this. This move is extremely dangerous for several profound reasons that ripple through global security.
Such as?
Firstly, and this is absolutely key to understanding the international outrage, Iran is a signatory to the Non-Proliferation Treaty, the NPT.
Okay, the main treaty trying to stop the spread of nukes.
Exactly. For decades, this has been the very treaty Iran has consistently cited to deflect accusations of pursuing nuclear weapons. They always argued, we're committed to non-proliferation, peaceful nuclear energy, we follow the NPT.
That was their shield, sort of.
Precisely their shield. Withdrawing from cooperation with the IAEA, the body that verifies NPT compliance, effectively undermines that long-held stance. It's like they've just thrown their primary legal and diplomatic defense out the window, telling the world, implicitly at least, that those rules no longer apply to them, or at least they no longer feel bound by them in the same way.
So it really strips away their main defense almost instantly. It's like they're publicly declaring, we don't need to play by those international rules anymore.
It certainly looks that way.
And what does that mean for their actual capabilities? What does it mean for their ability to do something with this beyond just, political posturing? Are we talking about a theoretical threat or something much more immediate?
Unfortunately, their capabilities are already quite significant, making this move far from theoretical. Iran already possesses 60% enriched uranium.
60%. Remind us, how close is that to weapons grade?
Very close. Weapons-grade uranium is typically enriched to 90% or higher. The jump from 60% to 90% is often considered the shortest and, in some ways, the technically least challenging step once you've achieved that 60% threshold.
So they're most of the way there, technologically speaking.
In essence, yes. It dramatically shortens what's known as breakout time, the theoretical period required to produce enough weapons-grade fissile material for a nuclear device.
Okay.
Plus, our sources indicate they have secret facilities where they could enrich uranium further, potentially to weapons-grade levels.
Secret facilities. So even if the IAEA was inspecting, they might not see everything.
That's always been a concern,
Yeah.
yes. This isn't just theoretical speculation. It positions Iran with multiple dangerous options. It's an explicit message that they're willing to move quickly towards nuclear weapon capability if they choose to. Or at
Or at
least,
least they want the world to think they can and will.
exactly, that perception is powerful in itself. And what's even more cunning, and something we see Iran skillfully leveraging, is the very uncertainty within the American media itself.
Back to the conflicting reports about the strike.
Yes, the fact that Americans themselves are debating and unsure if the strikes effectively destroyed Iranian nuclear facilities, that ambiguity we discussed earlier, is a powerful tool in their arsenal.
How are they using it?
Iran is taking full advantage of this lack of a definitive outcome to strengthen its negotiating position. They are even brazenly arguing they've emerged stronger after the recent military engagements, not weaker, despite the damage they clearly sustained.
Stronger? How can they argue that?
It's a bold claim, absolutely. But it plays directly into that confusion and division we see, particularly in the U.S. It projects an image of resilience and capability that can unnerve their adversaries. They're saying, your best shot didn't stop us.
Now, hold on a second. This is a vital nuance, I think. So, has Iran actually completed the withdrawal from IAEA cooperation? Is it a done deal?
Good question.
Or is this more of a political move, a strategic declaration to gain leverage, rather than a final, irreversible step that's already taken effect? Because that distinction changes everything, right?
It changes a lot, and that's a vital distinction, yes.
Yeah.
It's precisely where the strategy becomes even clearer and, frankly, more sophisticated. The parliamentary decision is not yet final.
Ah, okay, not
It
fine.
needs to be ratified by a higher body, specifically the Guardian Council.
The Guardian Council. Explain who they are again.
They're a powerful body composed of clerics and jurists, acting as Iran's ultimate constitutional oversight. They vet all legislation and effectively hold veto power over parliamentary decisions, ensuring they align with Islamic law and the Constitution.
So the parliament voted, but this council has the final say.
Correct. So while the parliamentary vote is a powerful public statement of intent, Iran hasn't fully withdrawn yet. It's not an immediate, absolute pullout as of this moment.
Okay. So what does it signify then? Why do it if it's not final?
It signifies that Iran is using this public parliamentary vote as a crucial piece of leverage in future negotiations. It's a threat, a very serious one.
A bargaining chip.
Exactly. They are signaling they're willing to escalate their nuclear activities and reduce transparency unless certain conditions are met. The military phase of the conflict might have paused, but the negotiation phase, well, as one source put it, will be much fiercer.
Fiercer negotiations ahead.
Iran wants to enter any future talks from a position of perceived strength, implying they have options, nuclear options, that the U.S. isn't prepared to counter. They're essentially saying, look, we have this card, this IAEA withdrawal card, and we're willing to play it if our demands aren't met. This isn't just talk. We've taken the first public step.
Which puts immense pressure on the international community.
Huge pressure.
Yeah.
To engage on Iran's terms or risk them going fully dark on their nuclear program.
Fascinating. Okay. Let's shift gears slightly. Segment 3, decoding Donald Trump's strategic retreat.
Right, because his position seems almost counterintuitive given the circumstances.
It really is fascinating, isn't it? On one hand, you have Israel's military leaders, like Chief of Staff Eyal Zamir, explicitly stating, and I'm quoting here, the campaign against Iran has not ended, but is moving into a new chapter.
Very clear language from Israel.
Yeah, they've even removed all internal restrictions related to the war. They seem ready for more, ready to keep pushing, keep the pressure on Iran.
Mm-hmm. They definitely sound like they're on a war footing still.
Yet, against this backdrop, Donald Trump appears to be the primary force trying to de-escalate, trying to avoid renewed conflict. This begs the question, why? Why wouldn't he support Israel's more aggressive stance, especially when he still possesses the immense military power to strike Iran again if he wanted to?
It seems like a complete divergence.
Yeah, a total divergence of strategic goals between key allies. What's driving Trump here?
This is where the analysis gets truly complex, moving beyond the obvious military chess game we often see reported in the headlines. Trump's motivations for seeking de-escalation are deeply rooted in a confluence of interconnected factors.
Okay.
We're talking domestic issues, specific economic strategy, and delicate regional alliances that aren't immediately apparent. It's not just about what happens on the battlefield. It's about what happens in his own backyard, with his own political future, and even in the global financial markets.
All right, break that down. Domestic issues first.
First, let's look at the domestic front. There's significant friction within his own party, the Republicans, regarding foreign military engagements, especially unilateral ones.
Okay.
Many were genuinely displeased that Trump bypassed Congress to authorize the initial strikes on Iran. They viewed it as a breach of American constitutional procedure, a serious concern about executive overreach.
Checks and balances.
Exactly. And a slippery slope to prolonged undeclared wars. Continuing a war, especially a prolonged one, would only exacerbate these internal divisions. It would cause more political headaches for him, potentially undermining his support base at a critical time.
So internal party politics are a factor.
A significant one.
Yeah.
He has enough internal battles to fight ongoing political issues, upcoming elections, without adding another costly, controversial foreign war to the mix. It's a matter of political capital, and he seems to be choosing to spend it elsewhere.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, the economy connection. Let's really unpack this, because that's not something you hear every day in discussions about war and peace. How does a war with Iran, or the lack thereof, directly affect U.S. interest rates? For some, it might feel like a stretch.
It might, but it's deeply intertwined, especially for Trump, given his consistent focus on the economy. It's absolutely central to his core agenda.
So how does it work?
Trump's primary focus, fundamentally, is the American economy. He desperately wants to see lower interest rates. Why? Let's break it down. Lower rates make borrowing cheaper for businesses.
Stimulates investment, hiring.
Exactly. When it's cheaper for companies to borrow, they're more likely to invest in new equipment, expand operations, and crucially, hire more people. This fuels economic activity, leading to growth. Also, the U.S. has a significant and growing budget deficit.
Right, needs to borrow money.
And needs to borrow more money to fund government operations. Lower interest rates make this borrowing cheaper, saving the government substantial amounts of taxpayer money over time.
Okay, so lower rates are good for business and the government's borrowing costs. How does Iran fit in?
Geopolitical risks, like a prolonged, unstable war with Iran. These create immense uncertainty and volatility in global markets.
Markets hate uncertainty.
Absolutely. When there's instability, investors demand higher returns, which means higher interest rates to lend money, because the risk of their investment going sour increases. This instability makes the Federal Reserve hesitant to cut rates.
Why the Fed?
Because the Fed needs to maintain stability and prevent inflation from getting out of hand amidst external shocks. Think about rising oil prices due to conflict in the Middle East. That's a major inflationary pressure.
Got it. So war risk, market volatility, Fed holding rates steady or even raising them.
Precisely. So a perceived peace, or at the very least a de-escalation in the Middle East, removes a major barrier to the interest rate cuts Trump so desperately desires.
It signals stability.
Exactly. Stability, which the Fed needs to see to feel confident in easy monetary policy in cutting those rates.
And does Trump believe the economy can handle rate cuts?
Our sources consistently confirm Trump's unwavering confidence in the U.S. economy. He points out that predictions of a significant downturn due to, say, tariffs or rising prices haven't actually materialized to the degree many economists predicted. This gives him confidence that rate cuts are not only feasible, but highly desirable for his narrative, especially looking towards re-election.
And has the Fed signaled anything?
Well, this ties directly to recent statements by Jerome Powell, the U.S. Treasury Secretary and Fed Chair. While Powell indicated no urgent need for an immediate rate cut, say, in July, he left the door explicitly open for future cuts. He stated that the Fed is in a strong position to be patient, given the robust economy and labor market. But that subtle hint, the cuts could eventually come, even if not right away.
Markets react to hints.
Immediately. It caused oil prices to surge. It signaled that economic growth and stability were potentially on the horizon, increasing expected demand for oil and, in turn, driving up its price. Trump understands this chain reaction. Stability in the Middle East helps stabilize oil prices, which directly impacts the Fed's calculus on interest rates.
So, if I'm understanding this correctly, peace with Iran helps stabilize the global energy market, removes a significant geopolitical risk that then clears a smoother path for those desired interest rate cuts, which in turn signals economic growth, boosts the overall economy. It's all incredibly interconnected, isn't it?
It is a truly complex web of cause and effect.
A strategic calculus that's far more intricate than simply, launching a missile.
Much more intricate. It's a direct chain, a series of dominoes Trump needs to follow in specific order.
Okay, so domestic politics, the economy. What was the third factor?
The Gulf states. And this is often overlooked, but Absolutely critical pressure.
Right. We often hear about U.S. Gulf state alliances as this kind of monolithic bloc, always aligned. But how do they factor into Trump's decision to pursue peace with Iran rather than continuing military action? Are they not aligned with Israel's more aggressive stance against Iran? Some might assume they would be.
That assumption is where things get tricky. This is a crucial, often overlooked element that adds immense complexity to Trump's calculations. It reveals that these alliances are anything but monolithic.
Oh,
The Gulf states, like Saudi Arabia and the UAE, were undoubtedly financing aspects of the conflict, and they are key U.S. allies, yes, but they had very specific, non-negotiable political conditions.
conditions. Like what?
Primarily, that the war should not escalate to regime change in Iran. That was a firm red line for them.
Why? Wouldn't they want the Iranian regime gone?
You might think so, but they feared the consequences more. A regime change would likely plunge Iran into chaos. Imagine a massive refugee crisis, potentially empowering even more radical elements, destabilizing the entire region with proxy wars for decades. Look at Iraq, look at Libya. They didn't want to repeat next door.
Okay, that makes sense. Fear of the unknown, the instability.
Exactly. The conflict was dangerously close to that threshold, which would have meant a much longer, more draining war, severely impacting already strained Gulf economies. Our sources reveal that Gulf economies were significantly hurt throughout the conflict. They directly felt the economic pinch of regional instability and the immense costs associated with financing these proxy conflicts.
So they wanted the conflict contained.
Contained, yes. And furthermore, the Gulf states have experienced tangible, immediate benefits from the current peace, or at least the truce, with Iran.
Benefits. How so?
For example, during the recent flare-up, Iran did not attack U.S. bases in the Gulf. Crucially, it did not close the Strait of Hormuz.
Which would have been catastrophic for oil shipments.
Absolutely catastrophic globally. In fact, when Iran did strike, it reportedly even warned Qatar beforehand, ensuring their allies weren't caught off guard.
Really? Warned them.
That's what reports suggest. It demonstrates a level of strategic communication and de-escalation that has proven directly beneficial for the region. They showed they could be selective.
Okay. So peace, or this uneasy truce, is actually working for the Gulf states right now.
It is. And given these very clear, very tangible benefits of relative peace, the Gulf states currently see no compelling reason to normalize relations with Israel.
Ah, the normalization deals. That's a key piece.
It is, especially since the U.S. and Israeli strikes did not succeed in toppling the Iranian regime. Remember, that was their red line. Why would they rush into a new, potentially costly alliance with Israel if the primary threat they perceived is still standing? And, in fact, has just demonstrated a willingness to maintain regional stability with certain partners.
Right. The calculus changed because regime change didn't happen.
Exactly. This adds yet another layer of pressure on Trump to maintain peace. He relies heavily on these crucial alliances and their financial backing for broader regional stability initiatives. Their priorities are clear: no regime change in Iran, and benefit from the current peace and de-escalation.
So putting it all together.
Ultimately, as we piece all this together, it becomes abundantly clear that Trump's focus is fundamentally inward-looking. His foreign policy decisions are heavily influenced by domestic considerations.
It always comes back home.
It seems so. He wants to lower interest rates, boost the American economy, create jobs, and avoid a costly, drawn-out foreign conflict that would only complicate his domestic agenda and his re-election prospects. The sources suggest it's now, quote, clear that Donald Trump does not want to return to war.
Driven by economics and politics, not just foreign policy.
Driven by a powerful confluence of economic and political reasons that go far beyond simple foreign policy considerations. It's a very pragmatic, almost transactional calculation, it seems, not necessarily an ideological one.
Okay. That sheds a lot of light on Trump's motivations. So if Trump is determined to avoid war almost at all costs, what options does that leave Israel with? That's segment 4, Israel's divergent paths post-ceasefire.
Right, because they're in a very different position.
They're on the front lines with very real and very different security concerns and clearly a more hawkish stance.
Definitely more hawkish.
Our sources outline 2 distinct, almost contrasting paths for them, depending on how things unfold with Iran. It really highlights the fact that even among close allies, there isn't always a unified front or a shared endgame.
Precisely. Israel is clearly preparing for contingencies. They're anticipating scenarios where the situation could either escalate dramatically or remain in this incredibly fragile truce. They simply can't afford to be caught off guard, given Iran's recent actions, especially that IAEA withdrawal vote and their stated intentions. Their national security calculus is just very different from Washington's right now.
So what are the two paths? Let's start with the escalation scenario.
Okay, let's consider the first scenario, that war resumes. This could happen for various reasons, maybe an Iranian miscalculation, perhaps pushing too far with their enrichment activities.
Like going to 90%.
Exactly. Or maybe a reckless act on their part that Israel perceives as an existential threat, forcing their hand. If conflict reignites, Israel has a very clear and immediate objective.
Yeah.
Locate and destroy Iran's 400 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium. That stockpile we mentioned earlier.
That specific amount again, why is that the absolute target?
Because without neutralizing that specific quantity of highly enriched uranium, any future military operation by Israel against Iran's nuclear program would be considered, by their own military and political assessment, a failure. It's the key ingredient for a primitive nuclear bomb, and it represents the most immediate, tangible threat to their security.
So taking out facilities isn't enough. They need the material itself.
They need the material, and this isn't a military task in the traditional sense where you just send in bombers to destroy obvious facilities. It's primarily, fundamentally, an intelligence mission.
An intelligence mission. How so?
Our sources emphasize that Israel's intelligence agencies are deeply embedded within Iran. They suggest, and I quote, Iran is penetrated internally to an extraordinary degree.
Wow. Deeply embedded.
This isn't theoretical speculation about general espionage. It speaks to years, even decades, of meticulous groundwork, asset development, signal intelligence gathering.
Boots on the ground. Cyber.
Likely, all of the above. The intelligence community's work involves years of meticulous planning and infiltration running agents, installing listening devices, disrupting supply chains, the wide-ranging attacks Israel carried out earlier.
The ones that damaged military and nuclear sites.
Yes. Those were described as among the most complex and precise operations in intelligence history. These were not spontaneous acts, but the chilling result of over 15 years of tracking Iran's nuclear program and achieving deep penetration into the Islamic Republic's most sensitive areas.
15 years of work culminating in those strikes.
It suggests an almost unfathomable level of granular intelligence on the ground, likely involving human assets, advanced cyber capabilities, extensive surveillance. So if war returns, it will be a high-stakes intelligence hunt, relying heavily on that extensive long-term groundwork to pinpoint and neutralize this highly volatile material.
A game of hide-and-seek with existential stakes.
A very dangerous game.
Okay, that's scenario one. War resumes, intelligence hunt begins. What's scenario two? What if the war doesn't reignite? Perhaps because the U.S. simply won't authorize further strikes, or Trump continues to aggressively push for peace, as we've discussed.
Right. What's Netanyahu's play then? Does he have a plan B for Israel if military confrontation isn't a viable option?
Does he?
Yes, he absolutely does have a new, rather ambitious strategic pivot, particularly if direct military conflicts with Iran is effectively off the table due to U.S. restraint.
Okay, what's the pivot?
According to a report in Haaretz, Netanyahu aims to, first, secure the release of hostages in Gaza and end the conflict there, then immediately pivot to push for normalization of relations with Saudi Arabia.
Ah, back to Saudi normalization. Using what leverage?
He hopes to leverage the perceived success of the recent strikes against Iran. The idea being that Israel's actions have weakened Iran or at least deterred them significantly, making Israel a more attractive security partner for Saudi Arabia. That's the bargaining chip.
So he's betting that the strikes, even if they didn't topple the regime, were enough to impress the Saudis.
That seems to be the gamble. It's a political gambit, a diplomatic maneuver to reshape the regional landscape in Israel's favor without further large-scale conflict with Iran itself.
But hang on, is that likely? Based on what you said about the Gulf states' perspective.
That's the big question mark. The situation with Saudi Arabia is far more nuanced and frankly more complex than Netanyahu might hope. As we discussed, given that the U.S.-Israeli military strikes did not succeed in toppling the Iranian regime, that key condition for the Gulf states.
Right, the regime is still there.
Saudi Arabia currently sees no compelling reason to normalize relations with Israel. Their strategic calculus is different. Remember, peace, or at least the current truce, with Iran has proven very beneficial for them.
Shielding them from wider conflict, keeping Hormuz open.
Exactly. They avoided attacks on their crucial oil infrastructure. Trade routes remained open. Iran even reportedly warned Qatar before strikes. These are tangible benefits they're enjoying right now.
So why rock the boat with a normalization deal that Iran would see as highly provocative?
Precisely. While Netanyahu might be banking on a perceived weakness in Iran, to sway Saudi Arabia into this grand alliance. Many analysts, including those cited in our sources, are deeply skeptical of this scenario's success.
It seems like a long shot.
It's a bold gamble, yes, but it seems to fundamentally ignore Saudi Arabia's current strategic calculus, which currently values the fragile peace and stability with Iran over an immediate, high-profile alignment with Israel, especially after the lack of regime change.
They've reaped tangible benefits from the current arrangement.
And they're unlikely to disrupt it without a very clear, very compelling reason that fundamentally alters their security landscape, a reason that the recent strike simply didn't provide. For Saudi Arabia, the current situation, however uneasy, is strategically advantageous enough that radical shifts are simply not on the table right now, it seems.
Okay, that puts Israel's options in stark relief. Let's move to our final segment, segment 5, Iran's ace in the hole and the fragile truce.
Right, pulling it all together.
So, with all these complex dynamics at play, U.S. de-escalation driven by domestic concerns, Israeli contingencies for both war and an uneasy peace, Gulf state priorities fundamentally reshaping regional alliances, what's Iran's ultimate leverage in any future negotiations? What's their ace in the hole, so to speak? The one thing that gives them undeniable power at the bargaining table, even after experiencing significant strikes.
At this moment, Iran holds what is undeniably its ultimate negotiating card, its most powerful leverage, and that is its stockpile of 60% enriched uranium.
That 400 kilograms again.
That 400 kilograms. American analysts have stated unequivocally that this quantity could be used to create a primitive nuclear bomb. This isn't theoretical anymore. It's a very real and immediate threat that gives them significant, frankly terrifying weight in any diplomatic discussion.
It changes their status.
It absolutely transforms them from just a regional power into a state teetering on the edge of nuclear capability, a threshold state. Yeah. And that status commands a very different level of attention and confers a different kind of leverage.
And can they make more?
Furthermore, yes, if needed, Iran possesses the capacity to continue to enrich more uranium in its secret facilities, away from any potential international monitoring, especially if they follow through on non-cooperation with the IAEA.
And we don't know where this current stockpile is.
There's considerable uncertainty about where this uranium is currently hidden. Some intelligence reports suggest underground wells, others point to various undisclosed secret locations across the country. What's clear is that its exact whereabouts are unknown to external intelligence agencies,
making it hard to target even for Israel's intelligence.
Extraordinarily difficult to neutralize. This obscurity is part of Iran's strategy. It creates a persistent, unquantifiable threat. You can't be sure you got it all.
So how will Iran likely play this hand?
Iran will undoubtedly become more audacious, more bold in its dealings with the United States and the international community. They perceive, perhaps correctly, that the U.S. has exhausted its military options for now.
Given Trump's clear desire to avoid renewed conflict.
Exactly. And that the U.S. is unwilling to return to a full-scale war. This belief that America's appetite for military confrontation has diminished emboldens them. It encourages them to exert more pressure in negotiations, seeing themselves in a stronger, not weaker, bargaining position.
So, the military strikes, ironically, didn't actually weaken Iran's bargaining position in the long run. That's a truly counterintuitive outcome.
It seems that way. They might have even made them more formidable in the diplomatic arena.
How?
Because they've survived the initial assault, demonstrated resilience, and crucially, they still possess that credible nuclear threat, the 60% enriched uranium. They feel they have the upper hand now.
So the strikes didn't achieve the intended diplomatic effect.
Precisely. Our sources indicate that the military strikes made no difference in the negotiation phase between America or the West and Iran. In fact, some analysts even suggest Iran might have become more dangerous in negotiations because of the strikes.
More dangerous.
Because Iran's internal strategy consistently leans on its military capabilities and perceives strength as leverage. And right now, they view their 60% enriched uranium as their primary bargaining chip with the Americans. They believe they could dictate terms, or at least push for significant concessions, precisely because they survived the strikes, showed they could absorb a hit, and still possess this critical, highly destabilizing nuclear material. It's a classic demonstration of asymmetric leverage.
Wow. So what does this mean for the truce?
All of this paints a picture of an incredibly fragile truce, a temporary pause in a much larger, ongoing strategic conflict. It's not real peace.
Just a pause.
And there are numerous very real factors that could reignite the conflict at any moment, even with Trump's stated desire for peace.
Like what's of the tripwires?
Potential miscalculations by Iran, for one. pushing too far with enrichment, maybe trying to sneak towards 90%, or an overt act of aggression elsewhere in the region, or reckless actions like actually attempting to enrich uranium to weapons-grade levels, or even moving to physically acquire a nuclear bomb, something Iran has subtly threatened it would do if attacked again.
Any of those could trigger a response.
Any of these could lead to a renewed conflagration, pulling everyone back into direct military engagement and potentially escalating to a much wider, much more devastating regional war. The potential for miscalculation is terrifyingly high.
And yet, through all these complex and dangerous scenarios, Donald Trump remains remarkably the most ardent advocate for peace in this situation, actively trying to prevent the war from flaring up again.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Almost an unexpected role for him. Absolutely. He is, without question, the last person who wants to reignite this war right now. This is evident in how he's constantly countering that American media narrative we talked about, repeatedly affirming the success of the initial strike, even if the reality is far more ambiguous and debated.
He needs that narrative of success to justify not going back to war.
Exactly. He's actively pushing that narrative of success and de-escalation precisely to keep the peace and achieve those deeper domestic and economic motivations we've meticulously discussed today. His actions are not just about foreign policy. They are deeply, deeply entwined with his internal political and economic agenda. It's all part of the same calculation for him.
Okay, so as we wrap things up here, what really stands out is that this isn't just, a simple political chess game.
Not at all.
It's a high-stakes poker match. Multiple players, hidden cards, everyone navigating this incredibly complex web of domestic pressures, intricate economic realities, shifting strategic alliances. It's a deeply interconnected global situation where an action in one corner of the world has surprising, profound ripple effects everywhere else, influencing everything from, like you said, the price of oil to the trajectory of an election somewhere else.
It really drives home the interconnectedness. And on that note, maybe here's a final thought for everyone listening to consider. In a world that's only becoming more interconnected,
Right.
how do the domestic, political, and economic pressures of one major global power, like the United States, shape the outcomes of international conflicts? Even when those conflicts seem primarily driven by purely geopolitical or military factors on the surface.
That's a great question. How much does domestic policy dictate foreign policy, even when we don't realize it?
Exactly. It really makes you think about the hidden currents beneath the surface of the news, doesn't it? It's never just about the tanks and the bombs, is it?
Absolutely. This deep dive really reveals that the big picture is often painted with countless tiny, fascinating brushstrokes you'd never see otherwise if you just read the headlines.
Hopefully we've shed some light on a few of those today.
Yeah, thank you for joining us on this exploration. We really hope this deep dive has given you, our listeners, a fresh perspective and maybe spurred your curiosity a bit.
Until next time, stay curious, keep those questions coming.
And remember to subscribe to the Deep Research Podcast, wherever you get your deep dives. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, everyone.